Within days of the Twin Towers' destruction, there were calls to rebuild them immediately, as tall or taller than they'd been. But the hard, sad task of recovering the remains of victims and removing the building debris took many months, and it became clear what a daunting task it would be to rebuild the 16-acre site.
There are so many things to consider when it comes to this stretch of land. Obviously, it has to be a memorial to the victims, but it also needs to be a major piece of New York's transportation infrastructure. There are commercial real estate considerations, safety issues, and concerns of area residents who lived through the attacks and those who've since moved in. All these different interests have legitimate positions and often competing needs. Maybe that's why 9 years later, these 16 acres look like, well, a construction site and not a moving memorial or a bold testament to America's can-do spirit. However, there has been a recent flurry of activity, as recently as just the last 6 weeks when a long-running political dispute was settled. And now there are up to 2,000 workers 7 days a week. And there's life here. Just last month, 16 white oaks were planted in the area that will be the plaza. 400 more oaks will eventually arrive. Several government agencies and corporations, including Condé Nast Publishing and a Chinese real estate firm, have committed to moving their headquarters here. Last week, Bank of America expressed interest too. It really is amazing to see and hear this much activity after years of institutional and political paralysis. Just in 2006, the New York Times called this area the hole in New York's heart. Perhaps now the World Trade Center site is on the road to recovery.
Someone who has been personally and professionally involved all along the way is Julie Menin. Menin, an attorney, used to own a restaurant near the World Trade Center. She's now the chair of Community Board 1, the neighborhood citizen advisory body, and among other things, a board member for the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. We spoke with Julie Menin this week from the design studio for the World Trade Center complex, 10 floors above all the construction. How did you go from being a local, a resident of the area, and a small business owner to being someone who has a prominent voice at the table about the decisions being made at the World Trade Center site?
Well, I think 9/11 affects people in a very different way. To me, as someone who was literally blocks away from Ground Zero, I felt the need to act. I was a regulatory lawyer for many years, and so one of the first things that any small business owner has to grapple with after 9/11 is insurance. It's a very difficult issue, and all the insurance carriers were taking out, I'll never forget, full-page ads about how they're there for the Lower Manhattan community, how they're there to help you. But the reality was actually quite different from that, and as a former lawyer, I felt that if I could help other businesses and help them to try to deal with some of these issues in terms of rebuilding, I wanted to try to do that. So I was appointed to the community board, I was appointed to the jury that selected the Ground Zero Memorial, and I started to become more and more involved in the Lower Manhattan community. And then in 2005, I decided to run to chair the board.
When you look outside the window and you see this construction site, do you think we should be farther along than we are?
We absolutely should be farther along, and I think it's really a disgrace that we're not farther along. I think the public deserves much better than that, and it's been really unfortunate to see. There's no reason why we couldn't have been at a point far beyond where we are, and it's really because of the fact that many of the parties viewed their own self-interest first before the view of the city of New York, the state of New York, and the country as a whole.
I understand there were at one point 19 different agencies involved in the redevelopment of this area. Why are there so many agencies involved?
Well, it's basically an exercise in how not to redevelop a site. And people who are not from New York City ask me all the time, well, why is it so complicated? Well, it's so complicated because there are too many people involved. And anytime you have 16 different chefs in the kitchen, it leads to delays, and that's really one of the main problems. I think one entity should have been in charge of Ground Zero. There were opportunities to have that happen shortly after 9/11. Those opportunities were unfortunately rejected by the powers that be.
Let's break down some of the players involved. Let's start with the Port Authority.
Sure. The Port Authority is the owner of the site. The Port Authority is a public entity, and it answers to both the governors of New York and New Jersey, which again puts two additional players in charge. And they basically have ownership of large swaths of the site. And then you have a private developer, Larry Silverstein, who also has some ownership rights. And that's really what has created some of the tension here, because you've got these two entities and they have somewhat different interests. It has led to a lot of acrimony, and that's really unfortunate, and there's really no place for it.
Larry Silverstein, the developer, he signed a 99-year lease 6 weeks before 9/11.
Right.
Why hasn't he been able to, until recently, come to some sort of compromise with the Port Authority and some of the other agencies?
Well, the Silverstein Properties and the Port Authority had a number of differences of opinion early on in the process. And unfortunately, when they finally seemed to be joining and looking like they were reaching some kind of tentative agreement, the financial collapse happened, and then it made it obviously extremely difficult to finance the towers. And that was really at the crux of the issue that has taken up the last couple of years in terms of the debate, is the Port Authority, as a public entity, should it engage in public financing of office buildings. There were some who said, no, it should not. The port generally builds bridges and tunnels and deals with airports, and that's what it does. There are others who said, well, absolutely, they have a duty to do public financing because there's not private financing available.
Even though the darkest days of the financial crisis are over, we're far from being on solid ground in terms of finances. Are they going to be able to fill these towers with people to rent the office space? And if they build residential affordable housing, are there going to be people who are going to be able to come down here and live?
That's a big unknown. We have to remember when the World Trade Center towers were originally built, New York faced that same uncertain economic future, and the towers were vacant for a long time. One bit of good news is that Condé Nast recently inked a deal for Tower 1. And that is good news because we certainly don't want Lower Manhattan solely dependent on the financial sector, on Wall Street. We really want to see diversification and see other businesses, creative services businesses like Condé Nast, come in. So that, of course, is hopefully a harbinger of more leases to come, but no one knows.
I know you have certain battles that you personally want to fight, and you're very interested in having the arts be represented at the World Trade Center site, the new site. Explain to me why you think the arts are so important.
Well, if we build this grand performing arts center and put in numerous cultural tenants and retail and other components, it would help to make Lower Manhattan more of a 24/7 community. Community that's open late on weekends, that's open late at night. All the people working in the various office towers could utilize that performing arts center. The schools in the area could use it. Cultural groups could use it. And it would really help to rejuvenate the area. So, and I also think when the city of New York has 9.4% unemployment, the single most important thing we can do for the city of New York and use the money that we were given by Congress is for job creation. We need to put people to work, and construction projects do just that. They create construction jobs and they create permanent jobs. So that's why I've been fighting hard for this Performing Arts Center.
The proposal for the Arts Center is still up for debate, but the most recent site plans show a patch of grass where it could be built. The rest of the land is now spoken for. There will be 5 new skyscrapers here. The tallest one, One World Trade Center, will stand 1,776 feet, slightly higher than the original tower it's replacing. The centerpiece of the site will be the September 11th Memorial, 2 square reflecting pools that pay homage to the Twin Towers' footprints. 70 feet below will be a 7-story museum featuring tributes to the victims of the 2001 and 1993 attacks. Also, architectural remnants from the original buildings will be on display. One of the difficulties, obviously, has been in rebuilding the site, you have to consider the fact that there are families for whom this is a graveyard for them. How has it been to try to incorporate the families and their concerns?
The decision was made to take the 16-acre site and dedicate half of it, 8 acres, to the 9/11 memorial, because it is obviously of the utmost importance that we remember what 9/11 is all about. And that's about commemorating the lives that were tragically lost and also teaching the next generation about these devastating events and where do we go from here. So 8 acres out of 16 will be dedicated to a memorial and a memorial museum.
What have you seen in the past, let's say, year that's given you hope that this is all going to work out, that there is going to be a beautiful site down here and a beautiful memorial?
I sat on the jury that selected the 9/11 Memorial, and I sit on the 9/11 Memorial Foundation. So we are in charge of now building and fundraising for the memorial. That project actually is going to open on the 10-year anniversary. The Memorial Plaza will. And so that does give me hope. It is so important that we open this memorial for the 10-year anniversary. That is the least that we can do for these family members, to make sure that they have a place to commemorate the loss of their loved ones. So that's something certainly that I think is incredibly important. But I think part of it is symbolism. We have to make sure that the message that we send to terrorists and to Al-Qaeda and to Osama bin Laden is not that they won, but that we were able to overcome this adversity, and that our city and our community and our nation can pull together. And that is why I've been such a critic of a lot of this fractious debate, because there's no place for it. This is not about individual self-interest. This is about what is right for the country and doing the right thing. And it's incredibly important to do that.
Of course, Lower Manhattan wasn't the only place where lives were lost that day. For the 40 passengers and crew of United Flight 93 who died near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a temporary memorial was erected by the state and local government. A national memorial is now in phase 1 of construction. As for the Pentagon, where 125 people were killed on the ground, 59 passengers and crew aboard the plane, the building was made whole again within 1 year of the attacks. A memorial was completed in 2008.